forces. We have in our country a Center for International Peace Keeping Support. And we train not just the internationals, but our own forces. So as a result, we are ready to deploy a very strong and seasoned team.
What are the terms of reference here? We are going to deal with what Mark is calling a gang. Okay? So to go to deal with a gang, you're therefore going to neutralize the gang, to disarm the gang, to disable the gang. You're going to war with the gang.
We're not really going to war with the gang. We might find, and this is why I said at the beginning, that when you deploy, it's important to understand the culture and community of the people amongst whom you're going to work. If you look into the history, with the occupation and the colonial heritage relating to France and the US, we believe that Kenya, an African nation that has ties with Haiti, who are people of African descent in diaspora, you might put it that way, that there is a closer understanding of cultural and social context and historical context. So we may find a warmer reception, I say warmer, that is to be tested. And that's why we're talking about reconnaissance. It may not be the need for us to necessarily, like you have said, obliterate the forces on the ground, the gangs, the gang violence, but rather restore law and order. Make sure that services run, provide a humanitarian intervention, address the human rights issues, as well as create peace and keep peace. So we see a number of terms of reference, not necessarily in the first step decimating the violence. However, our police force has dealt with the issue of gang violence even here in Kenya. Yeah. So it's not that we don't have the capacity, but we may not necessarily want to do that at first. We may find that it's easier for us to work on the ground there than it has been for other forces.
Okay.
And then we must remember that the reason why a country like Kenya is chosen and staying away from the French and the Americans is because of the very negative history Haiti has historically with specifically the French and a bit less and more modern times with the Americans. Kenya is not considered as a country that is coming to quote unquote invade and occupy Haiti. So we have that advantage. Secondly, we must understand that when you look at, for example, let me bring an example from home. If you look at the stated intent of a gang such as Mungiki, it was never a gang that was going to take over Kiambu County and make Kiambu County their county. Their intention and their way of doing things is different. So when Ambassador here speaks about creating law and order, it just does not just speak in terms of the traditional peacekeeping force that you'll come into a country and then there are two sides and then they'll create a government of national unity. We're talking about getting gangs out of the ports because 3 million people are not getting food. We're talking about getting gangs out of the bread basket of Haiti because they've scorched earth, they've chased away farmers, and they've lost hundreds of thousands of acres of food just in the last 1 year. So you're talking about a situation where the insertion of Kenyan police force is to ensure that there is a tendency towards normalcy instead of a tendency of creating a government of national unity where Barbecue and his gangs are then in government.
Okay,
yes.
Let me ask a question. So we've talked about the necessity of anybody entering into a conflict situation to have historical knowledge, to have social knowledge, and social knowledge now, we're talking about language, we're talking about the lay of the land, we're talking about terrain. I mean, it's peacekeeping, conflict resolution 101 for anybody who sat in a four-walled classroom in anything about conflict, right? So those are the things that we're talking about. So, is Kenya, and when we're talking about language, en français, many things happening here, is Kenya well placed to deal with that, number one? Number two, the forces that are being sought to send to Haiti, what is it that will be done in a manner that has not been attempted before in Haiti to quell gang violence that we see, to bring an end to some of these activities that you speak of, that has not been tried by anyone before to deem that this would be successful?
Wow, two large questions. Let me start with the first. You asked about the shared history, culture, language between Kenya and Haiti. And I will speak to what recently we heard debated at the Security Council when Kenya was on the council, 2021 and 2022, I think eloquently put by Ambassador Kimani of Global Africa. And I want to start at that level and then come back to the issues of Kenya. I think that it's clear to all of us today that we live in diaspora. And what is diaspora? If you look at what Africa is Africa a geography? Is Africa a history? Is Africa an aspiration, a place you seek to go to if you are in the US or in Haiti? Because you want to affirm your identity. Those are the questions we must first address. Having addressed that, understand that even as Kenya, we have our children, grandchildren, parents, and others living in the diaspora. This is the nature of shared history that we have with Haiti. Theirs, of course, as a result of transatlantic slavery, one of the greatest atrocities that the history of the world actually has documented. And having said that, looking into the history of Haiti, another thing that we share is the fact that from their history, we look at two liberators, one of them being a man called Toussaint Laurent, and his compatriot Dessalines, who were able, as slaves, disempowered, to actually create a revolution through resistance that gave them their independence. In fact, Haiti is known globally as the first black African country to have independence in 1804. I'm bringing all those to the table because we can find facets of the same within Kenya's history, and those are the things that, by the way, our police force and other forces are exposed to during training. We do have a shared historical legacy or trajectory. When it comes to culture, I think if you have, and I'm sure you have traveled the Caribbean, you'll find we share with them food. They eat things like omrere, which we call okra. You know, they eat beans like we do. We also have with them a shared deep spiritual understanding of whom we are, the context of whom we are as an identity
They practice voodoo.
of Africans. Yes, they call it
It's
voodoo.
Sorry, that was
the
just
context.
I said context.
But
I want to ask you,
please,
there's voodoo
yeah.
there, there's juju in West Africa, and perhaps there's some similarity in Kenya, many places. However, let's build.
Yeah.
When you speak about their spiritual context, there is a deep Catholicism in Haiti, built on the African understanding of religion. Some of that we can translate to our setting here. And then we can even go even further. The language, you've spoken about language. They speak Creole. Creole is a mixture of French with the African languages that were carried across the Atlantic by the people who were traded. So many of these are reflected even in our culture. And I want to say that we were not without the ravages of slavery. We know that many Kenyans or many East Africans were actually traded out of the port of Bagamoyo across into Asia and, you know, and to the continent across the Indian Ocean. So there's a lot of shared culture and history. But what's important is that despite transatlantic slavery having been the movement and passage of peoples across from Africa to Haiti, and by the way, I want to say that during that time, for every 4 Africans traded, only 1 European left Europe to go to America or to the Caribbean. Today, we are talking about a reversal, a sharing in reverse. We know today that with the touch of a button, you can trade in the Caribbean, in India, in Europe, in South Africa. But at the same time, we are also sharing amongst our young people. We are sharing sports. When Usain Bolt came to Kenya from Jamaica, soon after that, we heard about the emergence of Omanyala and track and field as being something that young people, yes, we've had it, but we've now people like Omanyala who for younger generations remind us of the prowess of people like Usain Bolt. We also now, in our stores, if you were to go, you would find Blue Mountain on the shelves. So we've spoken about the sharing of okra and beans and the dishes of the Creole nature, but we also find Blue Mountain coffee on our shelves, which comes from the Caribbean and is here. So the sharing is now both towards the Caribbean and backwards here.
I'm trying to connect between these 1,000 people who will go to Haiti and work in the areas of lawlessness and conflict with what is actually happening on the ground. So when I speak of language and terrain, it is in that context that I'm trying to make a connection.
I'm getting there.
Okay.
And so I'm saying that is a basis on which there is a shared heritage. But I want you to know that our forces are not just trained, like we've said, in military prowess. They are trained in cultural sensitivity, in the needs of communities, and in community entry. So that when our forces go, they will, of course, not just exert military force, but be able to engage on the ground with the communities there. That's the first point of entry. So I want you to know that indeed there is a level at which we will be able to engage. So I hope that answers your first question, that our forces are not blind to the shared cultural history, and they're able to deploy, not just having deployed there, but you've heard about deployment elsewhere where we have been able to work on the ground. So it's not a new setting per se. But I did mention that it is a reconnaissance mission, an evaluation and assessment in its initial form, buttressed by neighbors who also know well what is going on in the ground, such as Jamaica, Barbados, Bahamas. And like we've said, the shared African identity. I'm repeating those so that it's clear that we're not sending them into oblivion. We're sending them to a place where there is a knowledge.
This question. Do the Haitians also understand and appreciate this kindred sharing that you've just mentioned?
Yes, they do. Yes, they do. In fact, I'm happy to let you know that not too long ago, Haiti itself asked to be a member of the Africa Union. It's documented. Many African member states were delighted that Haiti had reached out, understanding its role, not just as an observer at the AU, which it was until that time, but its affirmation of its identity by saying it wants to become a member of the Africa Union. Haiti itself fully acknowledges the Africanness of its people. In fact, Haiti has done a lot to influence leadership across the globe and in particular in Africa. We do know that, for example, some of the leaders, and I think I want to quote some of the leaders you might be able to help me with their names, who have influenced and taken care of African liberation movements by providing finance from Haiti, by providing refuge for African leaders, but not just for Africa, for the African American too. I know they influenced Marcus Garvey and others. So
Kwame
Nkrumah, Kenyatta, and others can tell you about a shared leadership identity with Haiti. So Haiti does identify with Africa and does identify with the struggle that we have gone through and has supported us over the years. Haiti, despite having had the continuous earthquakes, the civil unrest, and other, should I say, humanitarian crisis, has actually reached out to Africa to provide support for us during our most, should I say, defining moments.
Yeah. In fact, historically speaking, Kwame Nkrumah, Namibian civil rights activists and independence movements were actually housed and sponsored in Ghana, because Ghana was the first one to get independence. And there was a conference that was sponsored by Haiti. So Haiti is well aware of its Africanness. That's number one. Number two, we need to remember that when we deployed in Yugoslavia, we were not same color as them. We were not speaking the same language. But there's something here that I think has been lost in our understanding of the current Haiti problem. What we are hearing from Haiti most, the people speaking the most, are the gangs. The people of Haiti, and it is so difficult to get information out of Haiti because the people of Haiti who are suffering from hunger, who are unable to feed their kids, who cannot, in fact, in one of the more posher estates, there were 12 people killed last week for the very simple mistake of trying to get out of their house to go buy bread for their children. So the issue here is we may look at it just from the perspective of the gangs and what they're doing and what they're saying and how they've hijacked the airport and things like that. But we're not looking at the people of Haiti, who number in the millions, who have a different problem. And their problem is this: before you even talk about the political solution, they want to be able to live in a country where they can work, because many of them have not been able to work for a long time. They're able to walk down the street, and their daughters and mothers are safe, because the amount of atrocities being meted out on women is increasing. Now, on our side, as a country, we need to assess this situation from a humanitarian perspective. Because if Haiti is in the problem it is in, and Kenya can help, for God's sake, why not?
Why not? Right? I want to ask Balozi, and even Mark, you can come in. Is it possible that this gang, so-called gang, has been given a bad name so we can stone the dog?
In fact, let me just, I have...
When Garang was doing the thing that he was doing in the early 80s, was he called a freedom fighter by...
He was called a terrorist.
Okay.
In fact, let's start in Kenya. Jomo Kenyatta was called a terrorist.
Exactly.
The Mau Mau movement was called a terrorist.
So as we describe, the activities, they've blocked the airport, they're doing this and the other, they have taken over, they do not want government. And Balozi, you even said, this conflict has escalated after the assassination of the president, and looking at the popularity of the late president and the popularity of the interim leader, and all those things, and the promise to an election, and there's no election that's forthcoming, and the push towards election. Is it possible that the conflict in Haiti at present is about seeking proper governance and leadership and the people to have their space?
Let me give you a bit of a historical perspective.
Okay.
You need to understand where the gangs came from. The gangs came from politicians, and that's why there's a connection. So what used to happen is a politician wants to I'm running against city, I will create a gang, and they will beat cities people and things like that. And then these gangs began to trade and to harass people and to do what gangs do, which basically includes fleecing businesses and things like that for security fees, as they call it. Now, what happened is, over time, this is now late.
So these are the small Jeshilo, Embakasi, Chinkoros, and others.
Yes, exactly. So that's how it started. Then they began to trade in drugs and then extortion rackets in terms of businesses and things like that. Then those gangs became bigger than the politicians. The politicians then tried in the late 2010s to rein in the gangs. The gangs at that point, their business was so lucrative that they began to assassinate politicians, all the way from members of parliament and things like that, right? So for a long time, you've got gangs and you've got political instability. Now, what happens? The same gangs that we are talking about today are the ones who assassinated the president. He was not assassinated by a military leader and things like that. It is the same gangs that assassinated their sitting elected leaders, okay, and continue to do so. So what we see on the facade of it is we think it is a political issue. It is not a political issue for the gangs. It is survival for themselves. And then it is now joined to the hip with politics, because that's how they originated. That's why we need to think about it in two tracks, not just one track. So the history of them absolves them from the moniker that they are looking for any form of democracy or to build Haiti. In fact, if they were, the atrocities that they're doing today in the streets of Haiti, the number of people that they are killing, raping, and maiming would not stand up to, because they are not killing cops. They're not just killing army people. They're literally brutalizing the ordinary Haitian.
So they're deeply entrenched in the society.
Yes,
And they may even, to the ordinary people, they may be a political solution to their daily lives. Some people.
I don't think that anyone on the streets of Haiti today would call them a solution. They are just a necessary evil for you to conduct your business in a particular settlement, because there's a gang in your settlement, there's one in your neighbor's settlement, and in order for you to get on the street, you must be in good books with a particular gang so that you can sell your wares. There are too many gangs for them even to actually take over in a meaningful way any governance arrangement in Haiti. And that's why we want to now go in with others and enforce the law.
So they're like the drug cartels
Yes, they are drug cartels
in
and beyond
Latin
that.
America.
It's
They're
like
heavily armed, they have everything, and they're against the government, but they have a following.
They do have a
They do
following,
have
but the
followers.
following also, I want to say, is a following of people who are looking for the reinstatement of a governance arrangement that allows them to get about their daily lives without having to engage with these gangs. So that following is looking to an election that was promised them. It's looking to a leadership that can take them forward. And again, going into the history, if you go into the liberation struggle of Haiti, there's always been fractious politics in that part of the world. Perhaps as a part of the colonial heritage, divide and rule. When we had Toussaint fight to liberate the country, his compatriot Dessalines then is the man who took over after him, but still was terminated by the same colonial master. And then we see many years, fast forward, we now find Mose, taking over leadership, and then again being, should I say, replaced by someone who was also part of his rank and file. I want to submit that this seems to be the culture and heritage that they have. So one of the things our forces are good at is capacity
Is it
building.
what they have, or is it something that they have gotten used to because it is what has been created? I base my question on a fundamental question. How rich is Haiti in natural resources?
Wow, their natural resources are really, I must say, amazing, because even in spite of their sad history of, I would say, environmental disasters, political instability, they've been able to support African leadership, African governments, and they still continue to meet the basic needs of their population.
Is it not strange then that a country that is that rich in resources, do they have an army? Do they have a police force?
You're coming to where I was just about to
All
leave
right,
off.
then why don't you head in that direction? Since
Okay.
we've already begun the journey, yes.
Let's start that journey. Let's talk about capacity building, and let's talk about a future and, building the socio-economic fabric of that country. I want to say that our police force, apart from everything else we have talked about as a TOR, are able to build capacity. They did that in Somalia, and one of their terms of reference will be to also build the capacity from the people there. No, it is short, limited. It's actually a temporary intervention, which is allowed in our law, and then we build their capacity and come back. And why? Because indeed, with the lithium and other minerals in Haiti and the other resources, they are good with their sugar and coffee, which has been a heritage of that country. They are able to trade internationally, and they are able, therefore, to rebuild their own
Who
economy.
benefits from this chaos? Because it's not just these gangs.
Yeah.